Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. So what old thing are we going to look at this week? Well, you're currently looking at a modern PC game. It's a fully convincing 3D world and you can walk wherever you like, walk into buildings, we've got simulated weather, we've got sunshine, we've got darkness, and we've got a full story to go along with it. But how did we get to this fully convincing 3D world? Well, we had to take lots of steps along the way, and today we're going to take a look at a few of them. When I was very young, one of the things we had in our house was the Osborne books. These might be familiar to you if you're of a certain age. We had two of these. The first was the Book of Computer Space Games. The book teaches you how to code, but this would have been way beyond me. I would have only been 5 or so at the time when this came out. But it did give you a brief idea of how things fit together, and it also had some amazing illustrations. The second book, however, was the Guide to Computer Games. And even though I would have been very young, I found this book absolutely fascinating. It had some awesome pictures in it, and it also explained the difference between RAM and ROM. There is, however, one page in this book that has become a bit of an internet thing, and that's for its predictions for the future. So let's take a look and see how close they were. I believe the book itself was written in 1982, and on this page it talks about the long distance game, where you can play head to head regardless of how far away you are. As for the radio receivers, well, your PC or games console probably has Wi-Fi. I think all these predictions were actually pretty accurate. It talks about LCD displays, which we've got on the Nintendo Switch, multiplayer games, realistic sports games, but the one that had me thinking was the ultimate game. Whilst we don't yet have games cubicles, we do have VR. Maybe the cubicles are still to come, but let's take a look at my journey through 3D so far. I think the first game I would have played would have been Death Chase on the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, and this works on a 16K Spectrum. I believe it was inspired by the Return of the Jedi speeder bike chase. Here you have to shoot down the two motorbikes. There's also a helicopter and a tank in the distance, and hitting these gives you extra points. It's pretty amazing that this actually fits in 16 kilobytes of space, and it's actually quite a fun little game as well. There's a lot more trees in the later levels as well, which makes it a lot more difficult. The next step along the way is Mercenary for the 48K Sinclair Spectrum. Here we've got a wireframe 3D world, and you're absolutely free to walk wherever you like. You can walk behind objects, you can even fly, so it was quite an achievement for its time. The graphics may look barely like what they're trying to represent, but this was a good step forward. Our first mission for this game gives us some coordinates to investigate, so we'll check them out in our new ship. I never had much of an idea of what you needed to do in this game, but it was great fun. You can also take elevators to go underground. Now it's true there's not a lot of detail here, but with the restrictions of the hardware I think they've done an excellent job here. I think the wireframe world has a certain charm about it, and I think the simple technique of simply changing the colour of the background on these underground rooms gives a bit of variation, and there are objects underground to pick up as well. On to Castlemaster, and this probably represents the limit of what the Spectrum was capable of at the time. This was developed using the Freescape engine, which you'll find in a few other games such as Total Eclipse, Darkside and Driller, but out of those I think Castlemaster had the most success. So you can see here we've gone from a wire-framed world into a fully solid 3D world. We can look up, we can look down, and items react to how you interact with them. It's true the frame rate is pretty much glacial here, but this was so impressive for the time. Although this game is really impressive, to take the next step into 3D you really need to look at a new system. And for me, I moved from the Sinclair Spectrum over to the Amiga, so let's see what the Commodore Amiga can offer. We're starting strong with our Amiga games, and the first on the list is Hunter. Now this is not just a good 3D game, this is probably one of the best games on the Commodore Amiga. If you have not checked this game out, check it out. This is an open world game and there are 3 different campaigns to play through. We've got a cool 3D world, seen from the third person perspective, and it may not look it, but this game has bags of atmosphere. The main campaign has you bring back the head of the enemy general, and to do this you have to speak to a number of people, visit certain places, find key items, trade key items, bribe people. It's a really cool little story. There's a good amount of different weapons in the game, from pistols to bazookas to explosives. The main attraction from the game though is in its vehicles. This game has such a wide variety of vehicles. We'll take a quick look at a few of them, but we've got everything from bikes to helicopters to hovercraft, there's ships, tanks, windsurfers, even a bicycle. Now the bicycle is actually quite useful because it uses no fuel, and there's a good range of these vehicles dotted all around the map. The helicopters are perhaps the most prized, as they're really quick for getting around, but they can easily be taken out by the enemy missile launchers. This game regularly gets referred to as a Grand Theft Auto game. I guess it kind of is with the sheer range of vehicles, but to be honest you don't even need to play the mission on this game. You can have just so much fun just playing around with the vehicles. You can just spend hours having fun. There was an intention to put planes in this game as well. I think they were taken out as they were a bit too fast for the maps. However, you can actually hack them back in, however they do handle as helicopters. Still fun though. I read an interview online with the creator of this game, and he said there is actually a hidden secret vehicle in this game, so I went to check it out. If you go to these coordinates on the Hunter mission, you're swimming about, but if you notice there is something hidden in the water that I keep bumping, and this is a secret room. And it houses, if I can pronounce this correctly, the Amphi-Uni Super Duper Bigmobile, which speaks for itself. But really we're concerned about the 3D, and this is a great 3D game, a nice big open world to explore, tons of vehicles, great story. If you get a chance to play this game, do so. Next up, we don't even have a game. This is 3D Construction Kit for the Commodore Amiga, and it's this engine, the Freescape engine, that was used to create the Castlemaster game seen earlier on. Being the Amiga version though, we have slightly better graphics, much better graphics, and it comes in this awesome cool box. The front of it opens out so you can see some of the things you can create. In the box you have a manual, you have a floppy disk, and you have a video cassette. And we'll take a look at this because it's so deliciously 90s, we need to see it.
Welcome to the world of 3D Construction Kit. Whether you want to devise devilish adventure games set on desert islands, or design the mansion you've always dreamed of, construct a futuristic car for your driveway, or even create a 10,000-seater football stadium and then charge down the pitch, 3D Construction Kit gives you all the tools you need to generate worlds where the only boundaries are your imaginations.
Whether you just want to doodle in 3 dimensions or meticulously create alternative landscapes right down to the tiniest details, 3D Construction Kit gives you the power. Techniques which were only available to professional programmers are yours as Incentive Software unlocks the secrets of its incredible Freescape system. First seen in smash hit games such as Driller and Castlemaster. Become the architect of buildings large and small. What does it look like to play at Wembley? Grab your kit and design your own stadium. You'll almost believe you can hear the roar of the crowd. For a more peaceful view of the planet, take a ride on your very own space shuttle. Or sculpt the streamlined contours of an award-winning racing car. With 3D Construction Kit, you're soon up and running. You'd like to invite friends round for a tour of your new house, but there's a problem. They live 3,000 miles away. Send them a 3D Construction Kit model for their computer, and they can step through the door and wander around. And you don't have to worry about them overstaying their welcome.
Now, what lies around that corner? The answer's up to you.
Now I used to spend hours on this. I never made anything truly grand. I think I did make a 3D construction of the science block fire escape at our school once. I think that was about as grand as I got. But you can kind of think of this as Minecraft from the 1990s, I guess. And this is my new creation from 2021. Yeah, the skills are a bit rusty. I was very happy to see though there is actually a website that's still open for 3D Construction Kit, and there are still loads and loads of games. I think there's even one that's been added in 2020 up there, so people are still using this. I do remember playing this game back in the day, Raise the Titanic. Again, it's not much to look at, but this bit of software was great. It really gave you a chance to make your own creations. So whilst it's not a game, I think it should definitely be in this list for me. Next we have some of the Microprose simulation games. These are 3 of them I own. There's Gunship 2000, B-17 and Knights of the Sky. I think they all use the same 3D engine, maybe it's modified slightly. I would say Gunship 2000 is probably the most impressive of these. I think because it tries to live within its limits, clearly the Amiga doesn't have a lot of processing power with regards to 3D, so I think the slower moving helicopter simulation actually works better with this. B17 is impressive, but it pushes the Amiga a bit too far. It's just too slow to play. Knights of the Sky is probably where we spent most of our time. A lot of fun this game. Not that I actually played the game much myself, I think I just enjoyed flying around, taking off, landing, trying out the different planes, but it's still good today. Before I leave my Amiga 600, we'd have to take a look at Stunt Car Racer. This is a 3D game with some awesome tracks, and it's got some really good physics. The aim of course is not to race, but to get in more and more spectacular crashes. This game is great fun. I think this might also be the first game I played linked up. I have my Amiga 600 and my brother had his Amiga 1200, and we played this over a null modem cable stretched between each of our bedrooms when we lived at home. This game is as much fun today as it always has been. It's an absolute classic. But again, we've hit our limits. This was pretty much the most my Amiga 600 could do. I did a slight upgrade to an Amiga CD32, which is basically an Amiga 1200 in a console style case. And we're taking a look at Frontier Elite 2 now. I just want to make it absolutely clear that this is not what the game would look like on an Amiga CD32. I have increased the emulation CPU speed by a lot. If you were to play this on a stock Amiga CD32, you'd probably get anything from 2 to 10 frames a second. I think this game was basically made to sell accelerator cards. I never played the first Elite game, but Frontier Elite 2 that I had for my CD32 really impressed me. Here we've got an entire universe to explore. It's basically a space trading game, and some of these bases might be in orbit and some of them might be based on planets. You can update your ship, you can replace your ship, you can buy new armaments and other upgrades. But again, this is another game that I was perfectly happy just to fly around in, and I really seriously spent a lot of time on this. Remember, I should have been studying for my exams at the time. Didn't do as well as I hoped. Maybe it had something to do with staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning playing this game. It was around this time that we were seeing Wolfenstein and Doom on the PC, and it sort of showed the shortcomings of the Amiga. It just wasn't built to handle these complex 3D worlds. What we did get, however, was Gloom on the CD32. Now this game does get a bit of stick online, but I actually quite enjoyed this one. The graphics you're seeing now aren't very impressive. You can change the detail, but the frame rate drops even further. You can turn off the ceiling and the floor. This does improve the frame rate slightly, but again, it's time to upgrade. I did actually end up swapping my CD32 with a friend from school, and I know a lot of people will look back and say, why on earth did you do that? But I swapped it for his Atari Jaguar with a few games. I am actually still happy with that because it came with Wolfenstein and Doom, and this machine was fully capable of running both and doing a really good job of it as well. I did end up selling my Jaguar when I needed some money at some point, and prices of the console and the games these days have really crept up, but this was a really good version, and so whilst I couldn't play the PC version, I really enjoyed this. The problem with the Jaguar is it did have a lot of lazy games, you know, not impressive at all, but these two, they really put the effort in. I never actually had Alien vs Predator back in the day on the Jaguar, but I know it's a well thought of game as well. Following this, it was time to join the 5th generation of consoles. This would have been the Sony PlayStation, the Sega Saturn and the Nintendo 64. I did actually own all of them back in the day at some point, and I do own them all now. My favourite of these would have been the Sega Saturn though. So we're taking a quick look at Sega Rally, one of the launch titles for the Saturn. Now the first time I would have seen this game was when the Sega bus actually came to our school. This was an actual physical bus with games consoles and stuff in it. It seemed really bizarre for our school to have done this, but this was where I first saw Sega Rally. They were showing us a few other games, and I remember we were trying to get one of the lads to pluck up the courage to say, basically, turn this off, we want to see Sega Rally, we've heard it's great. And that was the first time we played it, and it was really good. The Sega Saturn itself is not known as being a 3D powerhouse, but it is a 2D monster. Fighting games on the Sega Saturn are absolutely brilliant. But with a team of competent developers, it was no slouch at 3D either. This is Virtua Fighter 2, it's running in a higher resolution than normal, it's running at 60 frames per second, and it's a great game as well. As for first person shooters on the Saturn, you don't need to look any further than Exhumed. This is also known as Power Slave in the States, but this game is absolutely brilliant. This is actually superior to the PlayStation version. You've got more intricate maps, you've got light sourcing when enemies fire bullets at you. This game's well worth picking up on the Saturn or the PlayStation. And finally, the game that made me replace my Saturn with the PlayStation. This is Wipeout 2097, and for my money this is the best racing game ever made. I think the handling of the ships on this game, the great music, the way you can navigate a corner just perfectly and scrape the edge of the track, it just keeps you coming back. So whilst the Saturn version is good, the PlayStation version is just a whole lot better. I finally got my first look at the PlayStation around my friend Mike's house. I think he picked one up on release day or shortly after, and like most people, the first taste of the PlayStation would have been the Demo 1 CD. And as we are on the subject of 3D, it was this dinosaur demo. I'm sure a lot of you remember seeing this. Also on the CD was the Destruction Derby demo. Here you had to smash into other cars. The actual game though, I don't remember being anywhere near as good. But the absolute game changer for me was seeing Wipeout the first time, the first game in the Wipeout series. I think our main game of choice at the time was probably playing Mortal Kombat 2 on the Super Nintendo, so going from that to this, it probably seemed like sorcery at the time. Next we move on to Gran Turismo. I think I got a demo of this game, I think maybe with was it Official PlayStation magazine back in the day? The demo itself was fun, but I remember the replays, seeing the cars from different angles, that was really impressive. It seemed at this point that console technology had caught up with PCs. I think they were every bit as good at this stage. And finally the PlayStation version of Wipeout 2097. Again, it's my favourite racing game, but on the PlayStation it has even better graphics and it's smoother. This is an upscaled version of the game, but this is the way to play it. Upscaled PlayStation 1. It's gaming perfection. The Nintendo 64 came out, and I seem to remember helping Mike carry his PlayStation to the local game shop where it was promptly exchanged for a Nintendo 64 with Mario. This is Shadow of the Empire and the Hoth mission, the very first mission in the game. This genuinely felt like playing Star Wars back in the day. Another great launch game was Pilotwings 64, and this catered perfectly to my desire to fly around and do nothing. So whilst the N64 did have some good games, it was a bit of a backward step, mainly due to the cartridge method of storage. So you lost out on a lot of games with FMV and sort of more complex worlds, I'd say. I think this was probably his Atari Jaguar moment. However, the N64 did have an ace up its sleeve, and that game of course was Goldeneye. Now this game was so much fun. A proper first-person shooter with different weapons, really fun levels and a great game. Its main strength though came from its multiplayer. And back in the day in 6th form we used to have every Monday as a study day. You still had to go in and register in the morning and in the afternoon, but you had no set lectures. So basically we'd go in, we'd register, and then we'd go back to mine for a bit of goldies. So every Monday was basically play Goldeneye day. 4 of us surrounded a 14-inch Matsui TV and we loved this game. On the multiplayer, you did have radars that sort of showed the position of your players, I think, and we used to cover these up with post-it notes so no one had an advantage. So 4 players playing this game on the facility level with proximity mines. It was bedlam, absolutely fantastic. The next step came when my brother bought a PC through his workplace. PCs have come down a lot in price, but back then, yeah, things were still quite pricey. But he managed to source a Pentium 2 233 MHz. I think it also had 64 megabytes of RAM, which was quite a lot at the time. I remember him playing Quake, which is the game we're looking at now, in software rendering mode. This was basically using the CPU to do all the heavy lifting, all the calculations. Now, it would have looked nowhere near as good as what you're looking at now. It would have been 320 pixels by, I think, 240, and would probably have run at a frame rate of probably 25 if you were lucky. However, that changed when he brought home his first 3DFX Voodoo card. This was a 6 megabyte Voodoo Rush card, and I believe it changed this game from 320 by 240 resolution to 640 by 480, and it probably ran anything up to 60 frames a second. Along with the speed, the image quality was vastly improved. I remember being amazed that you could walk up to the walls and they would not pixelate anymore. I think the big leap happened in 1998 when Unreal came out on the PC. By then he had upgraded his Voodoo Rush to a Voodoo 2, and I saw the intro to this game and wow. This was probably one of the biggest leaps in graphics I had ever seen. I think at this point this was what convinced me that I needed a PC of my own. I knew they were expensive, I knew it was going to be an expensive hobby, but it just seemed so far ahead of consoles at the time. After the usual tricks of telling parents that you could use it for your homework, I did actually get one for Christmas, maybe in 1998. It was a second-hand one because, as I say, PCs were very expensive. But it was a Pentium 166, I think it had 32 megs of RAM, and I did inherit my brother's 3DFX Voodoo Rush card, and I think I went out a few days later and I bought a brand new Voodoo 3 graphics card from PC World. At college, one of my friends showed me EverQuest. I didn't play this myself at the time, but I remember watching him play, so this was a 3D world that you could explore with other players all around the world. It seemed at this point that technology was moving so fast. I remember CPUs were maybe doubling in speed every year or 2 years or so. Next came Half-Life, which used an updated version of the Quake engine, a great story and multiplayer on this. It also came with Team Fortress Classic. I spent loads of time on that. I still play Team Fortress 2 these days. Incremental updates in Quake 3. I seem to remember this was maybe one of the first games that used curved surfaces. I remember that was a big seller for this game. Not every game was a first-person shooter though. This is Homeworld. Think of it as Command & Conquer in space. Another excellent game with excellent graphics, and you can also pick up the remastered version these days. Definitely suggest you pick that up, it's really good. Morrowind came out on the PC, and I think this was the first of the series to use 3D accelerated hardware. I remember watching my friend play this at the time. He just bought his latest graphics card. That was the GeForce 256, the very first GeForce card made. Trying to play this on my own PC at the time was a bit of a slideshow. The first of the Fear games came out on the PC, and its main trick was lighting and shadows. Even if you had a top of the range system back in 2005, it would really have struggled to run this game properly. We got some detailed in-game physics with Half-Life 2. Objects had mass and could be balanced, and solving puzzles by lifting objects, balancing objects, or throwing objects was a main part of this game. Crysis was released in 2007. I don't think it's an understatement to say it took gaming hardware possibly 10 years to catch up to this game. When this game was released, it didn't matter if you had 2 graphics cards in your computer, multiple CPUs, there wasn't a PC at the time that could run this at full detail. I think a lot of this was due to the complexity of the world. You've got moving trees, you've got grass, physics. It was kind of more of a tech demo at the time, but it gave an idea of what was to come. The Stalker trilogy of games really showed what a great developer could do with a PC. Not only did you have a great 3D world to explore with loads of buildings and hidden areas, but this developer really put a lot of effort into the audio in the game, the sound cues, and just the ambient audio. Play this game with headphones on. I know the sequel, Stalker 2, is coming out, and I can't wait to play that one. Later on we got the newest release in the Elder Scrolls series. This was Skyrim on PC and Xbox and PlayStation, and even on the Nintendo Switch. I do actually own it on the Switch as well as the PC, and it's fine, it's a perfectly good serviceable port of this game. In a way I think that kind of amazes me more than the PC version. Being able to play this on the go on the Nintendo Switch, an entire world in your pocket. We also had a new type of game, commonly called walking simulators. I do think that term is a little bit unfair, but these are games that kind of tell a story as you progress through them. There's nothing to kill, there's nothing to shoot. Look at the world, enjoy the story. This kind of opened up games for everyone, I think, especially people who don't really touch games at all. At this point we're probably not too far away from the present time, but there's one final jump to make. I had heard about the Oculus Rift VR headset. It had been released to developers at the time, but it was announced there was going to be a second development kit, which is this one that I've picked up. This is the DK2. This came out before the Oculus Rift itself. It was intended for developers. Now I had absolutely no money whatsoever at the time. I think I put this across maybe 2 credit cards to buy this thing. I just wanted to see what VR was like so badly. And I'll be honest, the first demo I played with this, I had to take it off my head as it was making me feel sick. But it's true, you do find your VR legs. It takes a little while to get used to the motions, but once you adjust, it's fine. When the DK2 came out, there were a bunch of VR demos to play. The most impressive thing was this game. This is the Battle of Endor, and this was the future. You could actually look behind you in this cockpit and you could see R2-D2. You could fly close to the Death Star, you could fly next to these Imperial ships. It was absolutely unbelievable. I didn't hold on to this thing too long. Like I say, I was really skint at the time, and these were really in high demand, so I think I sold it on for exactly the same price that I bought it at, only a few weeks later. I was going to purchase the actual Rift down the line when it was officially released. In the end, I ended up going with the HTC Vive. I think it had a slightly higher resolution than the Rift. The Rift only shipped with one sensor, and the Vive came with two, and the sensors were used to record your position in space and translate that to the game. So the more sensors, the more accurate the movement in the game. So this is some old footage that I recorded when I got my Vive. This I think was back in about 2016. But at that time, Valve released the Lab, which is what you're looking at now. It's basically a VR playground. Loads of little interesting things you can interact with. You can say hello to this dog, you can pick up a bow and arrow, you can play with the balloons. I think when this came out there wasn't any real killer app. If there was, it was this VR playground. It was so polished, they'd spent so much time on all the different areas you could visit. They utilised the motion controllers. I probably spent most of my time in this archery minigame. I think it was at this point where I realised 3D VR had been nailed. They'd absolutely got this perfect. I've got two touch controllers. I can use them to accurately aim at a moving object. I can move myself in the 3D world. I can even look over this wall and shoot enemies from above. In the 90s you did have those arcade machines, the virtuality machines. Hugely expensive, those things. I never got to play one myself. I think they were something like £1 a go. And you got to wear a very heavy VR helmet and quite a low resolution display from what I hear. But with this they absolutely nailed it. VR was ready for prime time. So what of the games? Well, we did eventually get a killer app in the form of Beat Saber. I think everyone I showed this to absolutely loved it. Playing music in time with the beats, hitting the correct arrows, is so much fun. There's even loads of aftermarket music. You'll probably find some of your favourite bands. Someone will have made a Beat Saber version of your favourite music, I guarantee it. I think I would have been 37 years old in my house with a plastic helmet on, listening to Bon Jovi, Living on a Prayer, hitting these boxes with the arrows on. I don't think I've ever had so much fun in my life. If you only play one VR application, just make sure it's Beat Saber. If you do spend some time and get used to VR, I can recommend the VR version of Serious Sam 3. Check you've got that motion sickness sorted first though. So that pretty much brings us to the end of this journey. We've gone from 3D Death Chase to fully convincing virtual reality. And it only took 40 odd years. So I don't currently have a VR headset. I actually sold my Vive, which seems a little odd considering how much I've just said how wonderful it is. But again, we're at that point where technology is moving so fast, it's hard to keep up. It's kind of better to have your fun with these things and sell them, recoup your money, and put it into the next thing. The issue with the Vive for me was you had to have two sensors. Ideally these would be screwed on your wall, and these would be used to map your position. These things were actually quite noisy, and the headset itself, you did need a cable for it. So kind of the last thing to do with VR is to cut the cable itself. I am currently looking at getting one of the Oculus Quest 2 headsets. This is actually a standalone headset, but you can connect it to your PC. And there is currently a way to connect it via Wi-Fi. And the headset itself does run off batteries, so you have a completely cordless VR experience. So I'm kind of waiting for that. I have just spent a ridiculous amount of money on a router, £350, but this thing apparently has monster bandwidth, which I kind of want for this headset. So hopefully in the next month or two I will be picking up a Quest 2. I'm sure down the line I'll make a video on it, but for now, that's the end of the episode. Thanks for watching, guys.